Hi guys. So thanks so much for tuning into this. So Jack Stratton, Insider Trends, for those of you that don't know us. Now I think anyone that does know us probably knows us for I don't know, the kind of stuff we do for bigger brands, sometimes tech companies, and something that comes up a lot, which is really inspired why we decided to have this conversation, and all will become clear very shortly, is that and I find it really annoying actually, to be honest, is increasingly we do work with brands and do work in an environment where everyone is talking about community focused retail, boutique retail, grassroots retail, niche retail, all these kinds of things. And then the examples actually tend to be really massive brands who are trying to own that sort of idea, own that space. And there's something quite hollow in it, if I'm totally honest. It's not, I have nothing against a lot of these brands. I won't name any specifically, but we all know them. A brand that has 1,000 stores around the world says it's got a boutique community focused store. And there's something I think often slightly underwhelming at the end of that process, inevitably, because this is normally a business that's been around for 50 years and it's enormous. And I want to start to share more examples of genuine startup retailers with grassroots stories who are community focused in a very real way. And I had a moment recently where I found one almost by accident. And that's what this session is all about. So I'm joined by Andy Matthews and Aidan Thompson. Hi, guys. So firstly, Andy. So Andy from Andy Matthews Studio, architect based in London. And Andy, and he'll tell you all about his experience in a minute, but he worked on Tracksmith. I love Tracksmith. I love what Andy did at their store in London. And then having met him, he told me about Interval, which is a running company, and that's really the story of today is how Andy met Aidan, and how he ended up creating Aidan's first and only store, the story of how that came to be, which is a really lovely story. But most importantly, I think there's so much learning in it about what some of these hollow things that we talk about a lot really mean. I'm not going to tell you too much more about that because Andy's put together a great deck to really explain it. And then I'll jump in with questions, and Aidan will pitch in regularly as well. So, Andy, over to you, mate.
Thank you. Um, Thanks for the intro. I think this first slide is this phrase, "it's only running," is one of the most appealing things that has come out of meeting Aidan because it running has got quite bougie, maybe. It's become very popular. But actually, Aidan's approach to this has been very, I guess, community, but just ordinary and kind of just downplaying it. And I love the messaging that comes out from that. But I guess there's a bit of a story to tell before that, which is how did we get here? And quite an interesting journey. So serendipity being one of my favorite words. But so we supported Tracksmith on their London pop-up before they then completed a store, and we actually worked in the New York pop-up in November 22, and I went for a little 5K run. It's a shakeout run. I met this chap called Aidan who lived in Camberwell where I live and wasn't American. Um, and we kind of we didn't realize this picture existed until about 4 or 5 weeks ago, did we? I think.
No, I
Mm.
think we'd kind of convinced ourselves that this happened, but weren't actually sure it had happened because it's such a nice story. And then you found the photo, which
Yeah, and didn't think any more of it. And at that point, you were what, growth and marketing manager for.
yeah,
the-
growth marketing at Days Brewing, alcohol-free beer company down in
and you
London.
didn't know anything about retail, I think. Is that the case?
Still don't. Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. So
Nothing.
we'd also in between there we'd helped Tracksmith deliver their London store, which was an amazing experience, and we learned so much through that. Just going from initial kind of bubble diagrams, how do people interact with space, to obviously a full-blown store, and that was what we call often referred to as like the physical manifestation of their brand, if you like. So it's like their first kind of physical retail present. And then our paths crossed again because Russ, who's in this picture in the black and white one, referred us back to Aidan and said you should have a chat. And this very nice guy called Aidan had a big idea. Is that fair to say?
An idea at that stage.
And you were still working, and And I think it was a bit, it was interesting. And I think we went for a conversation, a bit of a beer and so on, and it seemed a bit tenuous. And I think the brief was vague, and there was no money, and there was lots of the other things flying around. But I think we really liked you and got on with you, and just thought, well, we could probably help do something interesting here. Um, and you'd also done some branding in the background, hadn't you, with Luke? But
Yeah, I think the branding was the first time it began to feel real. I think when I first spoke to Russ, it was like your classic late 20s, sat working from home, being like, oh, I might do my own thing. I thought I'd like ring Russ at Tracksmith and just get a read of how they thought of Scotland, to be honest, and like what a brand like Tracksmith viewed Scotland as. Very tall pipe dream. And then suddenly we're speaking to Andy. Suddenly we're looking at properties. Suddenly building a brand while it all still felt
Was it
pretty.
literally how, I mean, because Andy's going to get into this in a sec, but how quick was that? How quick was the process between you sort of being like, because most people are like, well, most people who start brands, running brands, any brand, and open a store, they'll have worked for an adjacent. Now, you hear it all the time, like someone who, they'll be a senior person at a fashion brand for like 10 years, and then they'll open up their own fashion brand because they know everyone already, they got all the networks and whatever. But you weren't doing anything like that. You just said, right, I'm going to open a store in Edinburgh. How quick was that bit between when you sort of vaguely were talking about it with a pint with Andy, and then you were like, right, we're going to open a store in Edinburgh?
I think it was like 3 or 4 months. I think it was like
Wow.
August, September. Spoke to Russ, had some pints with Andy pretty soon afterwards, and then it was December, and I was like speaking to my dad, and I was just like, I'm going to do it, and handed my notice in January without having the property or anything. I think we flirted with the idea of like pop-ups and testing, and I spoke to a few people who were like, could you test online? And but it just felt like, well, which we'll get onto later, like you can't build a community around a pop-up. You don't know how long you're going to be there. You can't get to
Mm.
know the street, the people. The bricks and mortar bit felt so key, and I'd spent so long working in digital and was maybe slightly digitally fatigued that I was like, we need the space. Like that was the big
Yeah.
thing. We need that permanency, and yeah,
It's
but it was
fascinating how quick you came to that. Something, and it's funny also how quickly you came to a realization that a lot of people, it can take years and trying all kinds of the wrong thing. I think you sort of figured out something really crucial just like that. Um, and sorry, Andy, I've totally carry on with the brand
no,
development, but it was
that's good.
it's remarkable how quick that happened. It's amazing.
Mm. I think the other thing is this was really interesting because you started approaching brands. You don't, I mean, there's so many things to solve in parallel. You can't do them concurrently, can you? So I guess, the amount of energy involved in that and going and talking to all these brands was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of it was just like scrappy messages on LinkedIn and trying to find the right people to speak to, and the difference, like you could message a founder of a smaller brand, and you could probably have a call with them the next week, and it was, it all felt very quick. But then with the big brands, it could take like weeks to even get the right contact, and definitely was a struggle at the start. I'm kind of looking back, like fair enough, was a struggle to be taken seriously. They're similar to probably Andy at the start. They're like, yeah, cool. This sounds good. Have you got a space? No. Okay. Can you maybe come back when you've at least got somewhere we can put our products? Like it was definitely a big learning experience. That I mean, I didn't even know that like you ordered. I didn't really even know what SS25 and AW24, what these phrases meant in retail. And then I was like, oh yeah, great. We're gonna open like around about the time of the Olympics. Like there's a few good Scottish athletes. It's perfect. And they were like, yeah, but it's right in the middle of the season and we don't have any stock and you need to order 6 months in advance. So I was like,
Mm.
ah, shit. Yeah. And then suddenly it was like, we were going to open a shop without anything in it. Anyway, that's getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
So a lot.
I think there's this other, I mean, it all became real quite quickly, didn't it? We came up to Edinburgh a couple of times, but this one, we were looking at potential retail. I mean, talking about retail safari, we walked around Edinburgh with my wheelie case and went to lots of quite average spaces that, and trying to see past that kind of thing. But it was interesting trying to see what may and may not work. And you were also looking at which part of town might work for you. And I think that discussion was really interesting. And we were almost kind of relating, well, this one feels a bit like Camberwell or Peckham or something, and this one feels a bit more like, I don't know, Bayswater or something. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, oh, this
Mm,
is a bit more Dulwich. Do you know? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the biggest advantage with Edinburgh always was like you could compromise on footfall without, massively negating distance from key areas. Like you
Yeah.
could do both. You could do community and ultimately be a shop that needs to make money at the same time by the size of the city. Like people can get around, and it was always going to be a destination store. But definitely, like down in London at times, it felt like you would eventually, if you're opening a store like this, have to make a decision around community or footfall and traditional retail to an extent. Whereas in Edinburgh, you can kind of you can do both. I think. Well, I hope.
Yeah, give it. Actually, it might be interesting for people listening. Give us, for anyone who would know, a sense of your location, Easter Road. How far would that be from sort of central retail areas in Edinburgh, or central kind of, just
Yeah, I mean,
generically kind of like Royal Mile, all that type of business?
we're about a 20-25 minute walk from
Yeah,
Princess Street, from Edinburgh Waverley, like the main train station. But we're definitely like eyebrows were definitely raised when we said we were opening on Easter Road. Like it's not,
yeah,
it's not a high. Well, it is a high street to an extent, but yeah, it's not known for shops like this or shopping in general. But
there's something in that though. The fact that it's a destination store, but like also, and you're not you're in a non-traditional retail location for what you're trying to do, but that it is walkable from that central area. It's a really good point. People are talking about London, Paris, Berlin, New York, these kinds of cities. It's like actually when you choose that different location, that's a whole different thing because then it's like being in a different town altogether. So I get it. There was still, it's a compromise, but not quite the compromise it might be in a city like London.
Plus,
totally,
the other thing is comparing it. There's no one else doing this in Edinburgh, is there? So,
Mm.
there's London's quite crowded. Lots of people are trying to do this, but the fact that you chose Edinburgh, it's still very hard. But obviously, you're the only one in that market, aren't you?
yeah. And I also like, I lived in London for 5 years, but Edinburgh's home. Grew up in Edinburgh. Again, to your point around big companies trying to build community, like I think it's incredibly hard when you don't know the area and the nuances and the city and
Yes.
the people and the way they communicate, the tones. Like that's when things fall on deaf ears. That's when you see, poorly written billboards up and down
Yeah.
the country. Like,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that it's really tricky to build a real community when you're not from the area at times because you already feel really part of it and you are doing everything with, I hope, the best interest at heart.
Mm.
We talked about the community thing as well, didn't we? Because what I liked about what you were saying was that you weren't trying to start your own community. You were there to support existing
Mm.
running clubs and crews, whatever, and it was very much a kind of open to to everyone who's already there. Come on, come all type thing, isn't it?
Yeah, they're already here. They were here well before I came back, and they've been here well before running is in whatever running's in right now. So it's definitely a switch from like how can we facilitate that community and how can we differentiate if we take events what we offer and be hopefully a source of information within running as well and expertise so to speak. But yeah, community facilitator I guess is where we kind of ended out rather than building our own community. Like the store is opposite a pub that has a run club from it every Thursday, so we don't want to come in and be like, oh, now on the
Mm.
Thursday we're doing our own club run. It's like, nah, so these things are already here. Like how do we work with them rather than saturating, which has happened in
Yeah. I
other
love
cities.
that. That's a really nice and humble way of looking at it. I really like that.
We found a store, didn't we? Sorry, there's a
No.
conversation, but there's some slides, but I think
Yeah, this is the
I
one,
think through
isn't
the
it?
yeah, the previous kicking the tires thing was came to conclusion quite quickly that a corner store was going to work really well for you, I think, didn't we? And it's this there's a bit of this idea of a kind of shop front on sorry a kind of a warm living space onto the street, and it's giving something to the street as well. But I think it just that all of the spaces we looked at, the corner gave you so much more, didn't it, in terms of what you could offer.
It's intriguing as well, like even now, for all we talk about digital presence and socials and Instagram, and yeah, we're very active on them all. When I ask people how in Edinburgh, when I ask them how they heard about us or how they found us, so many of them it's still from driving past or walking past,
Mm.
or like your shop frontage is so important, like to
Mm.
those kind of everyday people. So the corner unit for that reason, but way more so for events and big gatherings. And if we were on just a busy or just a street, like you do get in the way. People get, we're British. We like to moan. People get annoyed at big groups of runners standing in the way, and having that corner space with a dead end as well at the other end. It lets us like do that piece without massively disrupting the rest of the street.
That's interesting.
We talk about this one. The brief took a while to nail down, didn't it? And we talked to, and we talked to you, and I know you've been talking with Russ and some of our other friends at Treksmith, but I'd also had a really interesting chat with Perry at the store about like start with a t-shirt and build it out from there and so on, and lots of other insight. Um, and it wasn't quite clear what we were trying to sell and what was going to. So obviously you have to do lots of things, but you don't want it to just be a wash with, what's the actual purpose? And suddenly it became apparent that it was about shoes, and it was a shoe shop. I think was that in a pub as well? Maybe I'm not sure, but
I think so. I think that came from a conversation with a guy called Victor who has a store called Renegade in Oakland, who I was introduced to, and his one bit of advice was like, none of it matters if you don't get your three daily trainers right. Like
Mm.
that's what will be here when running is not cool again. That's what's rotated. That's what's inclusive. That's what lets everyone come in, and that's what ultimately lets the business do the things you want to do. Like,
Mm.
you can't run community events all the time if you're not making enough money. Like you'll just be
Yeah.
too stressed. You can't make a real community either if you're stressed all the time. Like, and getting that right and knowing that was I think, yeah, that felt like a big turning point, particularly for you, Andy, because I in my head didn't really know the whole time what it
yeah.
was. I think when
I
we said
wondered if
that,
you'd started getting a bit annoyed with us because we're like, come on, what's it actually about? What are we trying to do? And this was such a pivotal moment for us. I know you were trying to solve so many other things in the background because the design's like an eighth of what you were trying to do at the time. So you're quite sensitive towards it. But at the same time, the brief did need a focus, didn't it? And as soon as we got this, it's like, yeah, okay, fine, we know what we're doing. We're off to the races. We can respond to that. Um, but I'm not saying we're not getting frustrated, but it was we were moving the brief around quite a bit and as soon as it had that focus and another trip to the pub, we solved it, I think. So,
Mm.
the trainers gave it a focus, and obviously we'll see how that's resolved. And then other things are somewhat subservient to that, but still flexible enough that they can kind of grow from there. Um, and just a doodle and kind of and thinking about how it might work and how might people come into the store, I think was really, really helpful for all of us. And we've done some other things in the background, haven't we? I think to support you in terms of what's the identity like. And I think what's really helpful for us when developing briefs with clients of all people, especially retailers, that tell us what you don't like as much as what you do like, because we can kind of push against those two things a little bit. And I think we try to kind of play some of our conversations and understanding back to you as well as hoping to add. And obviously, we say what to avoid, but that's a different style that's not appropriate for your ethos and values. And again, we looked at demand in running in Edinburgh and all those other things. Um, and not as good as Jack, but we did something about retail trends, maybe, about where that's going and just what we'd seen and picked up from in our own experience. But also coming back to the brief and again with this pushing against the what do you like, what do you don't like, and so on, we'd come up with series of visual precedents, which kind of gave us a bit of a flavour of how it might develop. And obviously not taking on those, but it's warm, it's welcoming, it's tactile. You know, there's lots of these other things that we talked about.
Mm.
And I think we go back to this idea of constraints. What was really, really interesting for us is that there is just no money. It's a startup.
Mm.
It's still very embryonic, and I think even at this stage, it's like we're not quite sure where this is going to keep going forward. So, you know, if there is no money, what can we focus on? And we came up with these three ideas with Aidan to say, well, the shop floor I think is really important because it just sets that whole precedent for it. And we got really lucky finding that timber floor under there. The shop front, well, the shop front already exists, so how do we activate that, and how do we keep that fresh? We use vinyls or what other presentations within there. Doesn't really cost so much money, but get the lighting right as well, because I think that really, really affects the mood and the feel of the store. Um, and I mean, there's lots of other things to solve, but I think if you hold on to those three ideas, I think you can have something quite special. And then we also talk a lot about the human experience. I think this comes from personal, but I think from both of us, Aidan, it's just there's lots of really nice brands in the world that I probably wouldn't cross the threshold into their store at times because it can feel comfortable, overwhelming, and we
Mm.
wanted to focus on avoiding any awkwardness, you know, just being welcoming and just coming through the store. And a lot of that came down to Aidan as a personality character in his own right. You want to come see him, and it's very personable. But it's also how do you pay? How do you not feel awkward when you're trying on shoes and the store is operating around you? And so a lot of these kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but almost like slightly subconscious things. And a lot of our work, we think about, you notice when a space is bad and you bump into people and you don't notice
Mm.
when it just flows and it works. And I think getting those initial moves right is really important.
Was there, Aidan, I'd ask you as well, and maybe Andy, I'll put this question to both of you. Were there any retailers though that stood out as being inspiration because they did get some of that right? That you felt like they were spaces where, you know, even if they were reasonably premium, you did feel they're inviting. I'll be honest, I do, and I'm not, you know, I do feel that a bit about Tracksmith that Andy worked on. That's one of the things I liked about that space. It's a fairly premium brand, but it doesn't feel sort of cluttered by too many ideas. I felt very comfortable in there before I even really knew too much about what they were selling. I was quite comfortable going. But was there any before this? There was obviously probably lots of things you didn't like, but there was any brands where you thought, God, I like going to that space?
Uh, from my end, and this is probably just a lack of retail like experience
No,
and
no.
like I would before this wouldn't I mean now I do it all the time, but before this I'd never walk into a retail space and really deeply analyze it. I'd analyze the people and how they made me feel, but the space less so just because I wasn't in that. But the inspiration for me was always hospitality, like looked at
Mm.
places like St. John or like the institutional like places, brutal like places in London that had that atmosphere
Yeah.
that felt right, and then was sort of like if the atmosphere feels right, then it feels like the retail aspect must be working as well because it all kind of goes sort of hand in hand. But I definitely, I mean, now I go into every retail store and I'm like, that's quite good, or that doesn't quite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But at this point, it was all about, and to Andy's point, and the thing for me now more than anything is like, especially when you do have a bit of a presence online, and you get people maybe coming that aren't from Edinburgh to visit, is like the human side needs to live up to expectation. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing worse than you followed something on Instagram for a year and you like are buzzing to go to it, and then you get there and it's like, and obviously the people working there are not, not going to be as buzzing as you to come in. Like they're just working part time, got their own stuff going on, but like it's like living up to expectation because if you build something and there is hype, for want of a better word, it's like, and it falls flat when someone comes, that's like the worst case.
Totally.
Like,
I think you're
I was just going to say, honestly, like it's so interesting you're saying hospitality though, because you know you've just said that kind of very naturally, but honestly, most of the most I don't know, for me, like the most progressive retailers who are doing really interesting things in brand spaces, the number one thing they'll say is that they're getting their influence from hospitality because they know that the best hospitality is you know is all about human service in a way that often retail isn't for the reasons Andy's already pointed out. So I think you're bang on, to be honest, with that. Sorry, Andy.
No, I completely agree. I think it's that I was going to pick up on Aidan's point about hype, and I think Aidan's modesty and kind of it's just running type thing, it really helps in that respect because it's there's danger you hype something up and then it doesn't quite deliver, or you've seen something online that the photos look great, but I was at the event and it wasn't quite as good as it's being sold. And I think that, I guess what we're talking about is authenticity, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
you know, Aiden lives, breathes it, and is part of the community, and it's cool, but in a good way. It's like
Mm.
it's just community, and I think it's that authenticity which I find so appealing about it.
Yeah, I love these. And then this is where the drawings start to take shape, although, as you were saying earlier, oddly similar to the pub sketch. Well, not
Yeah,
oddly even.
yeah. I mean, let's be honest. It's a very small space. We did look at using the lower level as well. It didn't quite work out, but how do you optimize that to and obviously we need Aiden to sell things to make the business work, but how do we optimize it? And actually the real design came through these collaborative whiteboards, and we commissioned these CGIs to help Aiden start launching a presence online. But and obviously, you know, we want them for our own Instagram and things. But this kind of, I guess it's like a kind of soft test of the physicality of the space a bit.
Mm.
And, you know, clearly there were lots of things in Aiden's head that, you know, a lot of these things are sent via WhatsApp of, you know, it's going to be a bit like this and a bit like this. And that was really helpful just to tease all this stuff out. Um, and I think what's really nice is that actually it is really sunny on Easter Road at times, isn't it? And it does wash in through here and it's absolutely beautiful. Um, and I think it's just, you know, the brand colors and how does it feel and what's the shoe wall like and you know, we go on to there and obviously it is very sunny. Um, and obviously we started with terracotta floor, we didn't use that. Um, and obviously it doesn't always it's not always sunny in Edinburgh, so I'm led to believe. Whenever I go it is. So um but we felt representing it as it's actually going to be used was really important. And I mean, what's interesting for me about this is that this comes back to those core ideas of get the lighting right, have a nice floor, and get the windows right. Okay, it's maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I think that at a core for something that doesn't really have much cash to throw at it, I think it's really really helpful. Um, and then I keep deep diving with this really, and even testing out, you know, to how big are the shoes, how comfortable they need to be, and some of the precedents we liked online and the tonality and very, very simple products. And I think we, you know, we often, you know, and little doodles and things in the whiteboard, we often do a couple of hundred, 300 drawings for a project like this. And what I personally really enjoyed was not doing that. We did two drawings for Aidan
Mm.
because you know the value add was the you know the kind of bigger idea, and ultimately you were delivering this with carpenter and electrician and just whoever you could bring to it, weren't you? And obviously your own time and your sister and family. But these were toolkits really, so you know try and make it a bit like this. But this is the core idea. Try and keep it off that a bit and
Mm.
don't get too close to this. I mean, I don't know if you want to add anything there, Aidan, but it's very different to how we'd normally do it, where you specify everything, you know.
I think because it was first time, it which you kind of said earlier, constraints kind of breed creativity or something along those lines. It's also like naivety fueled a lot of things as well. Like didn't know anything different. Like I think was it? It can't. It might not be new, Andy, but it was like, and now we maybe sometimes take it to technical drawing or like, and I was like, but isn't that this? Like this
No,
is.
no, these
I can
these are the
just
drawings.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I was like, this
that's
is
it.
perfect. We
Yeah,
can just. I'll just sit with my joiner and we'll just chat it through. But
yeah.
yeah, it was
And there was one drawing for the ceiling, and again, that was it, wasn't it? Really, but
Mm.
leave that to the
um,
electrician. Sat down for an hour and they were like, "Yep, cool,
absolutely.
get it."
I think it's really refreshing because it's like, well, what's the core of the idea? What's the actual exercise here? Well, we're trying to make a space that's like this. You know, the actual, in some ways, a technical realization, and dare I say it, maybe slightly fussy, but it just wasn't suitable for this, was it? Really? You didn't need us to do that.
Yeah, something you mentioned earlier, and you know, not to make too big a point of it, but you with 200 drawings, you're more likely to have a lot of different things going into the space, as opposed to what Aidan has now, which is actually, and we'll see this in a minute, but you know, like a space that has a kind of really lovely simplicity about it that allows it to evolve, because obviously a shop evolves, especially for you, Aidan, doing this the first time, but you know, you're constantly learning build new things in. It's going to change according to, seasonality and all kinds of other things. And what better than actually quite a stripped back space in order to do that? Versus, yeah, the 200 drawings just means you can have a hell of a lot of stuff, and then suddenly 2 months later you go, oh, actually, yeah, we needed something different. Now we got to rip a load of stuff out.
I mean, I would argue that we try and keep some flexibility in our designs as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
your point is absolutely right because you've designed it so heavily that there isn't that flexibility. But I mean, that flexibility was key here with Aiden because you haven't run a retail store before. You haven't run a retail store in Edinburgh, and we don't know what the demand is. We don't know what's going to be popular, and it has to be able to be loose enough to respond to that demand. I think, isn't it?
Boring as well, but it has to respond to planning, and the changing room's not there. The treadmill's there instead. We don't have a mannequin there because there's a toilet still there because the council didn't let us take out, and that felt like world ending for like half a day when that got rejected. And then you're like, right, it'll be fine. We'll have to have a toilet on the shop floor, but we'll call it a changing room. It's for runners. We'll work out. Like
Yeah.
without
There's
that,
also
if we had that rigidity, I guess, of like this area is dedicated to this, and then something like that comes up in planning, you're like back almost, you can almost go back 1,000 steps because you've got these like drawings that you feel like you have to abide by potentially.
That thing
I think
that is authenticity though, isn't it? That's the point. If you're a runner, if you're someone in that community, then and you're in a store and you see something that is there because it had to be, because someone's set up a shop on a budget. That's actually what authenticity is. Versus,
mm,
oh look, there's a street art mural, that's been made on the wall by an incredibly famous artist who was born nearby. And you're being told that's about what authenticity is, and it isn't. Authenticity is when is the scars, the real stuff that you see because someone wanted to open a shop and they had a budget. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think, we're too distanced from these things in a lot of mainstream retail.
I think you're right. I think the other thing I was going to suggest is that a lot of these stores, in particular running and others, that they rely on key events throughout the year. So a lot of it is how can we get more rails in for what we call marathon mode. So you keep kind of key things, or can there be a small concession here? So we'd designed in these other areas where you might be able to get more rails in, or,
Mm,
or whatever to service those things. And I guess there was also a discussion about did food and beverage kind of come into this? Is there a coffee thing? And
mm.
um, there was a lot going on, wasn't there? Really, but I
Yeah, that
think
was
you were.
the early thoughts were the old cafe come retail, but
Mm.
with alongside the shoes coming in, I think we were like, let's just do one thing. Let's just make it clear for if the whole thing's about overcomplicating, not overcomplicating things, then the worst thing we can do is start by having a slightly overcomplicated store, I guess. And
Mm.
sure, we sometimes do batch brew on the weekends if we're doing. But again, that goes back to community. Like, there's three amazing coffee shops in Easter Road. Like, what do I add by having another one
Mm.
sort of in a running store? Like, nothing.
I
Just
love that. That's really nice because that is not what a lot of retailers are. That's not the way they're necessarily looking at it. I think it's really nice.
You were quite protective of the design more than I was, I think, Aiden.
I
Because
think
we
that
were coming on to kind of keeping designing through WhatsApp, weren't we, really, as you were building it?
Yeah, I like that it's got our first minor drawing change, a plant being sacrificed, as if that's going to be the. Um, I think that maybe again there was like the inexperience of like maybe sometimes looking at the drawings and being like, you've done these and you're an architect, so like this must be here for a reason, and like I need to go check, even though like I'm now standing here and it's like I think I need to be just behind the till, like in a store that's been done for the last 200 years of shops existing. Someone's stood behind the till. Like, I think I'll probably do that. And then you're like, yeah, crack on. And you're like, all right, cool. And then off we go.
Well, I guess some people can be quite rigid like that, but I think for us, it's just that it has to be flexible, and the reality is that you're seeing the space emerge and getting to grips with it and how you might engage with it. But I mean, the whole process was fascinating for me. I was trying changing rooms in Girona on the left to think you wanted to doodle for some seats outside, and then we found that bulkhead wasn't there, and it's like, oh great, there's some paneling arrived. Like, yeah, perfect. Let's it felt really exciting to me, even though I was in London and you were in Edinburgh. But um, do you want to talk about the day it opened? Not
I
really.
can tell. Oh, I mean, definitely like one of the best, but can't always really remember it days of my life. I mean, it was a really interesting one because I do get quite stressed, but I'm fairly calm, I'd say. And I had people come up from like London that had helped with the shop, and there was a big kind of day around it, and I could tell like no one, even the postie came by and was like, "When you open in like a month or so?" And you're like, "Nah, mate." Like you could tell like a lot of people didn't think we would do it. I don't want to make it sound like it was like grand designs and like, well, it was we were backs against the wall, but like because I had the drawings and because I knew actually how little really we needed to do in terms of fixed things. I mean, the shoe shelves literally went up the night before, and then I was like, cool, it's done. The shop is done. We literally now just need to clear it all, clean it, and finish off some paint. Like I think because I had the vision in my head, I knew we'd be fine. But like you could see everyone else being like, "There's no chance." But I mean, there's like 15 of us in there for like 3 or 4 hours, and then come 5 p.m., there was like 80 people,
So
standing.
I thought
Like,
I was off the train to kind of have a beer with you and have a celebratory lunch before it opened, and then it's like, oh God, you need to
yeah,
start
well,
hoovering.
Yeah, I was going to say, suddenly you're on a
Yeah,
Henry Hoover.
I
yeah.
think the Thursday was meant to be like friends and family opening night, but that got dropped pretty quickly when it was like, nah, Thursday's like in you come, and if you don't want a paintbrush, then get out.
You did it though.
We did it. We didn't get the word mark or the sign on the outside, so it was a blank
Yeah.
shot. But uh, yeah, we did it, and it didn't rain because it wouldn't have really worked if everyone had to be inside. To be honest, it would have been absolute bedlam. But yeah, it was a good day.
Such a good day.
And it's obviously been thriving since. So it's a year in April, isn't it? No, it's coming up for a year. Is that right? I can't remember.
July 12th was the opening party.
So yeah. Um, and I guess having watched this from afar and obviously reflected on our experience, and obviously we keep in touch. I keep coming back to this idea that it's about people in the community, and it's not about the fancy finishes. And they're lovely, but actually, what you've created out of nothing really is just extraordinary. And I think I am quite critical of some of the bougie London running groups, but this seems so authentic and engaged, and yeah, it's just lovely to watch from afar. Um,
Love
Yeah,
it.
it I'm also like getting nervous for sure around like the digital side and that word community, but it does feel real, and I think Andy mentioned it. Transparently is in running at the moment. It's not that hard to gather a big group of people and take a photo
Mm,
outside before
mm.
like it's so in demand. But we're always like it shouldn't on the content side like if it doesn't live up to if it didn't feel like that on the day it shouldn't go online.
mm,
um
mm,
I think again this is as much a testament to the communities that were already there, and we're getting like a mixture of this isn't one club, this is loads of different people from different clubs coming for a slightly different event to their
that's
kind of
quite unusual, isn't it?
weekly weekly run. Yeah, maybe I think Edinburgh again we benefit from not it's not oversaturated yet for sure, and I think the people within the communities know what can happen and are rightly like protective of certain ways you do events and not just doing everything willy nilly and collaborating with anyone and anything that comes up with some free samples or something, like choosing that quite critically and making sure it is valuable.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think the two big things that I take away from this conversation, but it's just generally about learning about this, two massive things that people need to learn from, I think, a lot more is um, the way that you framed how you've looked at community through Interval, which is that, which is very respectful and humble. You've turned up in a community in a place. How can you support that community? Not how can you create one around a brand, which even the best kind, let's face it, is a wholly transactional thing. It has to be because it's a business trying to own that. And why do they want to create a community to make money out of them? Whereas I like the point that you made, which is that no, this is about shoes. We need to sell shoes to build a business, but then that business, that shop is going to support a community. It's a different way of looking at it, and I think a much more simple, humble way of framing it, which I really think retail is losing slightly, or definitely there are lots of brands who frame it the wrong way. That's definitely one thing. Um, and the other thing that really stands out from all of this, back to Andy's point about really, you not having any budget and then really digging down into these three constraints, and constraints being so important with creativity, but also, clarity of a sort of vision of something. You've ended up with something I can see just in the photos. And my God, I'm going to come up to Edinburgh and see this store. I really look forward to doing that. But I see a lot of retail spaces, and what's really nice is even just from these photos, like I get it. There here is a thing that looks like what it was intended to be. It sounds like a simple thing. That doesn't happen that much. My
Mm.
God, brands and retailers get in such a muddle, like trying to manifest their ideas. And in a weird way, the one of the best things you had is not having the luxury of loads of money, loads of people helping you do this. Being able to sit in a pub, chat to Andy, and draw it. There's something in that. There really is. Just the constraints and the simplicity of that. They're the two big things I'm going to take from this for sure. And really, and really appreciate both of your time. I should say as well, for anyone watching this, if you want to see in terms of Andy, um, you can also visit, if you want in Edinburgh and you can't visit Interval, you should visit Tracksmith, who have a store on Chiltern Street, which is, very central, sort of 10 minutes back of Selfridges, which is really great. And you can see his handiwork there. Um, but obviously, if you're anywhere near Edinburgh, you must go and check out Interval. You won't be able to miss it because obviously you walked up Easter Road and there won't necessarily be that much to see. And then suddenly there'll be a beautiful running store. But yeah, do follow them both on LinkedIn and keep an eye on their progress because I think it's a really, really lovely story. So look, Andy, thanks so much for your time, Aidan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And
Thanks a lot.
yeah, thanks everyone for listening in, and all the best.
Thank you.